Chapter 1. On our third anniversary, I had planned to propose to Emily. Little did I know, before I could even get down on one knee as her boyfriend James, her first love, beat me to it. He knelt in front of her and offered his own proposal. Emily looked up at him shyly, her eyes shining with joy. The crowd cheered and jeered, almost as though I were the unwelcome third wheel. I sneered and clapped half-heartedly, tossing the bouquet to the ground. Well, if that's how it is, I can only wish you both eternal love and a life together until you're old and gray. Emily's smile faltered, and she quickly rushed to explain. James had to rehearse a proposal scene recently, and I was just helping him practice. I curled my lips in disdain. So you used the venue I went through so much effort to prepare for this moment? Before Emily could respond, I pulled out the ring I had kept in my bag and tossed it in front of James. Did you prepare a ring? If not, why don't you just use mine? Everything today had been meticulously planned by me. I had invited a large number of people just to witness my special moment with Emily, but instead, it turned into a spectacle for everyone else. Emily stared at the ring box I had thrown. James looked at me with a bewildered expression. I didn't know you were planning to do this. I interrupted him sharply. Are you blind? Couldn't you see it? Everyone here knew, except you? My words seemed to strike a chord with Emily. Oliver, can you at least speak kindly? Why do you always have to be so sarcastic? In an instant, the whole room fell silent, and everyone's eyes darted back and forth between Emily and me. It seemed like they didn't understand why Emily was so protective of James. Truthfully, neither did I. Ever since James returned to the country, my relationship with Emily had changed. All of her attention shifted to him. Every time I confronted her about it, she'd tell me it was because she was James's assistant. I used to convince myself that it was just that, but now I see it was all an excuse. Seeing that I didn't speak, Emily dragged James towards the door. Not once did she think about picking up the ring box. As she passed me, she gave me a cold glare. You should really think about what you did today. As I listened to their footsteps fading away, I laughed bitterly. I laughed at my misplaced sincerity, at how I had loved such a woman for all these years. The crowd thought I had lost my mind and quickly gathered around to comfort me. Their voices of sympathy only made my thoughts grow colder, and one particular idea became more and more resolute in my mind. Chapter 2. Emily came from a well-off family, and her beauty made her the object of everyone's admiration at school. Naturally, I liked her too. Though it was a one-sided crush, everyone knew Emily had a boyfriend, although no one had ever actually seen him. Still, it was clear to everyone how much she adored him. So, when Emily kissed me, it felt like a dream, and I was happy to lose myself in it. Emily told me she had broken up with him and asked if I would be with her. I knew the allure of an unforgettable first love, but I still decided to give it a chance. Over the 3 years we were together, I worked hard to make everything in our relationship work. I never expected Emily to love me deeply. As long as she was trying to like me, that was enough. During those years, we functioned like a normal couple, and I truly believed Emily cared for me, until James came back. That's when everything changed. I always thought I was the one putting in the effort in our relationship, but James showed me otherwise. Between the two of them, Emily was the one who initiated everything James received, all the affection I never did. To say I wasn't jealous would be a lie, but Emily was still my girlfriend, so I stubbornly believed she still cared for me. When Emily stayed at James's place for the first time, I convinced myself she was only helping him. But as her visits became more frequent and their bond grew stronger, I could no longer fool myself. Every time I brought it up, Emily would get furious, and we'd end up fighting. Yet, I always apologized the next day because I loved her. Maybe Emily knew I would always be the one to apologize, because those who are favored often fear nothing. But today, during the proposal, I saw the excitement in her eyes, and for the first time, I truly understood Emily. Maybe she had never loved me. Maybe she had never considered a future with me. Chapter 3. In the end, I saw all our friends off one by one and started cleaning up the proposal setup I had worked so hard on. I picked up the discarded ring box from the floor and opened it. Inside was the ring I had carefully designed, but Emily would never understand the thought and effort I put into it because she didn't love me. Just like today, aside from that brief moment of surprise, she never gave the ring another look. There was a photo wall in the room, but it was filled with very few pictures of Emily and me together. I used to think she didn't like having her picture taken, but after I added James as a friend, I realized it wasn't that Emily didn't like photos. She just didn't want to take them with me. She was more than willing to take countless pictures with James. She would even enter the kitchen, which she hated, just for him. She'd travel far to buy James's favorite buns, just because he mentioned wanting them. She'd stay by his bedside all night without hesitation. When James was sick, Emily would comfort him, even when he felt down. And me? Her so-called boyfriend? I was left to lick my wounds alone. I tried to resist all of this, but all I got in return were Emily's cold glares and her impatient tone. After tidying up the room, I noticed the wetness on my face. I reached up to wipe it away and realized I was already in tears. At that moment, my phone beeped. It was an update on James's Weibo. Because of Emily, I had been paying extra attention to James's posts. There were no pictures, just a caption. Feeling off today, but thankfully, I have my little cat to comfort me. Instantly, I felt a sharp pain shoot through my chest, and my breath caught. No one knew better than me who little cat referred to. I closed my eyes, and I could almost see Emily curled up in James's arms at that very moment. Chapter 4. When I got home, I looked around at all the familiar surroundings, but it only brought a stabbing pain to my chest. This home had been arranged entirely by me. Reflecting on it, Emily probably never even considered a future with me. I walked to my room like a zombie, collapsed onto the bed, but my eyes unintentionally landed on the camera in the corner. I had once dreamed of being a photographer, capturing the landscapes I longed to see. Back in school, everyone said I had a free-spirited vibe. I often imagined being a photographer with no fixed abode but a full heart. But I had put down my camera for Emily and chosen to settle here instead. At that time, I thought Emily was the most beautiful scenery I could ever see. I got up and gently dusted off the camera. As I did, my mind flashed to the words I once said. I quickly turned on my computer and found the page for the scientific expedition team I had been following. Sure enough, they still had an open position for a photographer. I hesitated for a while, but finally submitted my application. Even as I fell into a deep sleep that night, Emily still hadn't come home. The next day, just as I was stepping out of the bathroom, I heard the sound of the lock turning. But this time, unlike before, I didn't rush to the door to greet Emily. Instead, I walked to the living room and sat down to work on my computer. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw that I had received an email saying I passed the initial screening. They now needed some of my previous work, so I had to select a few good photos to send. I focused on the screen, unaware of Emily's gaze on me. It wasn't until she walked up to me that I looked up, but I only gave her a brief glance before returning to my work. Emily's face immediately turned cold. "Oliver," she said sharply. I didn't stop what I was doing and responded impatiently, "What's wrong?" Emily had never been spoken to like that before. "Oliver, are you still mad about yesterday?" she asked. "I'm not mad, I'm just working. You're the one who spoke rudely yesterday. It's already generous that James didn't ask for an apology," I said, my frown deepening as I looked at her. My words seemed to take the wind out of her sails. Emily struggled to respond, her words caught in her throat. When the message on my computer sent successfully, I stood up. "Since you're not mad, I'll forgive you now," I said, walking past her without caring for her words. Just as I reached the door, Emily's voice sounded behind me. "Oliver, what are you doing? What do you want?" I turned and looked at her, confused. "What do you mean? I'm just going to my room to get my camera." Without waiting for her to respond, I walked into my room. When I came back with the camera, Emily was already gone. Chapter 5. In the days that followed, I spent most of my time outside taking photos. I figured after everything that had happened, Emily wouldn't come looking for me for a while. But I was wrong. When I got home, I heard voices inside. Frowning, I realized it sounded like more than one person. I opened the door to find James sitting on the sofa. My eyes darkened as I saw Emily busy in the kitchen. She walked over to James, bringing him a plate of cut fruit. "James will be staying here for a while. Please tidy up the room and make it available for him," she said to me. I clenched the keys in my hand, a chill creeping into my chest, but I forced a smile. "Sure, I'll tidy it up in a bit." Emily looked surprised for a moment. "Fine. If you can do it now, that would be best." Without looking at them again, I headed to my room. Soon after, the doorbell rang and Emily went to answer it. It was the delivery person. She happily took the food and brought it over to James. But then, she noticed there were only 2 dishes and a bowl of rice. "Why is there so little food? And it's potatoes, which James doesn't like," she complained. I sneered and walked over to the food. "Because this is my meal, not yours," I said. Both of their expressions froze, but I pretended not to notice and began eating. What did it matter to me if James didn't like potatoes? I liked them, and that was enough. "Oliver, are you still mad at me?" Emily asked. "I'll apologize to you, all right?" I glanced up and replied, "Why should you apologize? James didn't do anything wrong." Emily interrupted me, but I just kept eating and casually browsed the information about the expedition team. When she saw that I wasn't playing along, Emily snapped, "Oliver, are you giving me an attitude?" I shook my head, maintaining a calm expression. "No, I'm just dealing with a few things." "What things?" she asked. I frowned. "I don't have work," I replied, my voice dripping with disdain. I curled my lips impatiently and walked past her, taking my food to the dining room. Emily's face turned pale as she absorbed the meaning behind my words. Chapter 6. Soon after, I received the news that I had passed the final review with the expedition team. They contacted me to schedule a medical examination. Upon arriving at the hospital, I unexpectedly ran into Emily and James. They were heading toward the obstetrics department. I followed them at a distance, watching as they collected a stack of reports from the self-service payment machine. James gently placed his hand on Emily's belly as he held her close, and they didn't notice the report that slipped from their hands. I bent down, carefully picking it up. It was a pregnancy test and a paternity test report. The mother's name was Emily, with her ID number, and the father's name was James. In that instant, I felt all the blood in my body freeze. I walked out of the hospital like a zombie. They already had a child on the way. What did that make me? James, now on the rise in his career, would never publicly acknowledge Emily. What was Emily planning to do? Did she expect me to be the fallback guy? To step in as the father of that child and help James raise it? A flood of thoughts overwhelmed me. All the bitterness and resentment surged at once. Just then, my phone rang. It was the leader of the expedition team, asking if I was sure about joining them as a photographer. If I had any doubts before, my answer was now crystal clear. "I'm sure." After hanging up, I looked back at the hospital. I knew Emily must be eagerly anticipating the arrival of the child, but only because it was James's. I gave a bitter smile. Fine, let it be. These past few years, I was just blind. Chapter 7. I quickly went home to pack my things and booked a flight to another city. My disgust for Emily had reached its peak. Before leaving, I even sold the house. How could I let James live comfortably in a house I had bought? I had worked so hard to buy that house, putting in countless drinks and sleepless nights. I thought I was building a future with Emily, but I was wrong. Emily didn't care about any of it. She would be fine even in tough times, as long as James was with her. I shook my head, trying to stop thinking about her. I turned off my phone and boarded the plane. As soon as I landed, I saw messages from Emily. "You sold the house? Are you crazy? Oliver, where are you? Answer the phone. You're not picking up my calls. What do you want? You'll regret this." I raised an eyebrow, surprised at how quickly the real estate agency had processed the sale. But it made sense. The house was in a great location, with plenty of natural light, and I had priced it reasonably. It wasn't surprising it sold fast. I didn't reply to her. Instead, I decisively deleted her contact information. Emily's messages reminded me I hadn't removed her contact yet, so I quickly erased everything related to her. I even unfollowed James on Weibo. Looking back, I realized how ridiculous I had been. constantly monitoring James for Emily's sake. I had turned myself into a jealous fool. I looked up at the vast blue sky, took a deep breath, and thought, it's all right. My new life is just beginning. I didn't receive any more messages from Emily. I guess she didn't bother reaching out anymore. She was probably secretly relieved. After all, with me out of the picture, James could finally take my place. Chapter 8. A month had passed, and during that time, I had traveled to several cities with the expedition team. This was the life I had once dreamed of. It wasn't until I had it that I realized how much I had missed it. But now, it wasn't too late to finally live it. That day, after completing a task at dawn, the team leader announced that we would have a few days off. My place was just in the neighboring city, so I booked a flight home. When I arrived at the doorstep, I was completely stunned. After taking a moment to adjust my emotions, I tried to pretend I didn't see the person standing in front of me. But as soon as I took a few steps, Emily stepped in my way. Looking at her blocking my path, an inexplicable impatience surged within me. I pulled out a cigarette from my pocket and lit it, the nicotine helping me fight the urge to walk away. Why haven't you been replying to my messages all this time? Emily's voice broke the silence between us. I looked up at her again. She had lost weight, and her face showed signs of exhaustion. She no longer had the appearance of the spoiled princess I once knew, always looking at me with a hint of disdain. Now, her eyes were red-rimmed and she was fighting to hold back her tears as she looked at me. I looked away, unwilling to look at her anymore, surrounded by the smoke of the cigarette. I pulled the corners of my mouth into a forced smile. We're over, Emily. Her face went pale in an instant. You never told me, she whispered. I sneered. Can I say it now? I don't agree. I don't agree with breaking up, she protested, her voice trembling. I frowned, frustrated. Emily, what's the point? You don't love me. Isn't breaking up exactly what you want? Her expression froze, then panic washed over her as she rushed to explain. Are you talking about James? I told you there's nothing between us. Why don't you believe me? I watched her uneasily, her performance still as clumsy as ever. Even now she was pretending, and I couldn't help but admire her acting skills. I said coldly, you should go be an actress. When she opened her mouth to explain, I suddenly lost all desire to continue the conversation. Do you have any other business, Miss Emily? If not, I'm leaving. With that, I bypassed her, ready to leave, but she grabbed my sleeve. Am I bothering you? Do you not have time tonight? Maybe next time? I didn't want any more interaction with her, so I cut her off directly. I am busy tonight. Someone is waiting for me at home. I glanced at her with dissatisfaction. She had never been treated this way by me before, and she understood the meaning behind my words. Her face turned even paler. There won't be a next time. I don't like my life being disturbed by people I dislike. If you don't leave, fine, I will, I said, pulling my hand free and leaving without another word. A strange emotion surged within me. It felt like something I had longed for was finally mine, but I didn't need it anymore. Chapter 9. That night, I didn't go home to sleep. I saw that Emily wasn't leaving, as though she was determined to wait outside my doorstep. So, I spent the night drinking at a bar and later stayed at a nearby hotel. I had hoped that once I walked away, she would leave, but when I returned home, there she was, squatting in front of my door. She appeared to be resting, her eyes closed, and even wearing high heels. I ignored her and opened the door. You're back, she said as the key turned, waking her up. She stood unsteadily. I didn't look at her and walked straight inside to pour myself a glass of water. The alcohol from last night made my stomach uneasy. From the doorway, Emily's voice came. Did you drink last night? You smell strongly of alcohol. You have a stomach condition. You shouldn't drink too much. So, you know I have a stomach condition, I said sarcastically, cutting her off. She fell silent, staring at me with those same eyes, as if I were the one who had wronged her, as if I were the one who had betrayed her trust, used her, and ultimately cheated. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Emily, why are you here? We're done. You can go live your happy life with James now. I moved to close the door, but she held it open. I looked down at her, impatience and indifference in my eyes. She seemed hurt by my gaze, but quickly looked away, murmuring, "Oliver, can we talk?" I suddenly laughed bitterly. Why should I talk? Just because you want me to. Do you really think I'm some dog coming and going at your command? I stepped back, my smile cold, not reaching my eyes. James doesn't want to go public with you, so you're coming back to me? Emily's face turned a pale shade, but I pretended not to notice and continued. Want to talk? Sure. Bring back the engagement ring I prepared for you, and we'll talk. For a moment, Emily's expression blanked. Of course, she had forgotten about the ring. Without waiting for her response, I closed the door. After a while, I heard her muffled voice from outside. Wait for me, Oliver. Listening to the sound of her high heels gradually fading away, I finally couldn't hold myself up anymore and sank to the floor. Chapter 10. I thought Emily wouldn't return for a long time. After all, how could she find that ring? I had given it away carelessly. But reality hit me hard again when I looked at the ring in my hand. I couldn't understand how she had found it. I thought it might be a replica, but the engraved letters inside the band were unmistakable. The material and texture were exactly the same as the original. I knew Emily had found the real ring. I sighed. I had said it, so now I couldn't take it back. It's rare that you found this ring. My words seemed to surprise Emily. She started to explain again. There really is nothing between James and me. We've been over for a long time. I gave a cold laugh. Are you sure? Oliver, listen to me, she said desperately. I could see the flustered expression on her face and her mouth opening to explain, but my mind flashed back to what I saw at the hospital. Oliver, can you give me another chance? I can explain everything. I laughed humorlessly. You can explain all you want, but what about the child in your belly? As a man, it's hard not to mind being cheated on. James's existence would always be a thorn in my side, especially now that Emily was carrying someone else's child. Emily's eyes widened slightly. How do I know? I said bitterly. Right, Emily? I saw it with my own eyes. She reached out to grab my hand, but anger surged within me. Don't touch me. She stumbled back a few steps, and I added, What right do you have to ask for my forgiveness? You're carrying another man's child. Why should I forgive you? Chapter 11. Looking at Emily's pained expression, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. But mixed with that satisfaction was a swirl of other emotions I couldn't quite pinpoint. I turned my gaze away, afraid that if I looked at her too long, I might soften. Go back. Don't come looking for me anymore. I have things to do. I turned and walked toward the kitchen, planning to prepare lunch. Emily's tearful voice called out from behind me. Oliver, didn't you say that if I found the ring, you'd consider talking to me? Haven't we talked enough already? I turned around to face her, my expression cold. Besides, now you're the one begging me. I get to decide how this goes, don't I? Emily froze for a moment, and then her expression hardened. This is what it's like to be I forgot. I was the one fighting for you. I smirked, looking at her with indifference. Go back, Emily. You're just not used to being without your caretaker. Or maybe you need someone to clean up your mess. Her tear-streaked face caused a wave of irritation to surge within me. I grabbed her hand and dragged her toward the door, closing it quickly before she could react. Soon after, I heard Emily sobbing from outside the door. If you keep crying at my door, I don't mind calling the police to report a disturbance. Emily continued crying for a while longer, but eventually, she left. Chapter 12. This time, I seemed to have underestimated Emily's determination because I saw her again standing at my doorstep. I didn't want to get entangled with her again, so I stepped past her and walked toward the elevator. Oliver, I was wrong. I really was. Please forgive me. I'm begging you. Hearing her pleading tone, my steps faltered for a moment. From behind, her tearful voice continued. The child was just an accident. I didn't mean for it to happen. If you don't like it, I can abort. No, I replied quickly, my tone sharp. What if you abort and then blame me for it? I won't, Oliver, But I didn't want to hear any more of her explanations. I just coldly watched as the elevator doors slowly closed. I didn't expect her to follow me downstairs, but she did. Wearing high heels, she stumbled and fell at the lobby desk. I turned around and saw Emily slumped on the floor through the glass doors, her hands covering her face, crying and murmuring apologies. I bit my lip, suppressing the emotions bubbling inside me. I walked toward her. "Emily, I am not your dog. You can't just throw me aside when you don't want me, and then call me back when you do." I started to walk away, but Emily grabbed the hem of my shirt. Looking down, I saw her tear-streaked face gazing up at me. I used to think that if Emily ever wanted to break up with me, I'd beg her to stay. But reality had turned out completely different. "Oliver, don't go. I really can't live without you. I really like you," she said, her voice trembling. Hearing those words from her, I felt no joy. If she had said this earlier, maybe everything would have been different. I pulled her hand off my shirt. "Emily, I still say the same thing. We are done. That's it." With that, I stood up and quickly walked away. It wasn't until I could no longer hear her crying that I finally allowed myself to release my emotions. Saying I wasn't sad or heartbroken would be a lie. After all, I had truly loved Emily for so many years. But how could I trust her? There was always James between us. No, perhaps there was more than just James between us. From the beginning, our statuses had been unequal, and it was wrong from the start. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep, the image of Emily crying on the ground flashing through my mind. The first thing I did when I woke up was call the security guard to ask if anyone had been lying near the elevator. When I heard, "No," my heart finally felt at ease. Chapter 13. I thought Emily had finally given up. After all, I hadn't seen her come looking for me in over 10 days. An unknown emotion surged within me. I couldn't tell if it was relief or regret. But it didn't take long before I saw her standing by the roadside. She looked weaker than she had before. I wanted to pretend I hadn't seen her, but she walked straight toward me. There was no avoiding it, so I didn't bother. I pressed my lips together and looked at her, silently asking what she wanted. She seemed very weak, and her voice was faint. "Oliver, I've aborted the child. Can you give me another chance?" I was stunned in place, but before I could react, Emily collapsed to the ground. I quickly picked her up and rushed her to the hospital. After paying all the fees, I looked at Emily lying weakly in the hospital bed, and I suddenly felt very tired. But deep down, I was clear on one thing. I couldn't soften. In fact, over these past days, I had come to realize that my life could go on without Emily. Without her, I could live better and happier. I had come to truly enjoy my current life and didn't want to go back to the past. So I couldn't soften toward Emily. I knew I no longer loved her the way I once did. I had finally let go. I placed the prescribed medicine on the bedside table and was about to leave when suddenly something grabbed my hand. Looking down, I saw that Emily had woken up at some point and was holding onto my hand, unwilling to let go. I sighed. "Emily, we can't go back to how things were. Why are you doing this? Why can't we go back?" "I already do." I couldn't help but shout at Emily, but seeing her hurt expression, I softened my tone. "You know we can't go back to how things were." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she pressed her lips together, still clutching my shirt tightly. I opened my mouth to say something, but could only sigh. "Oliver, are you worried about James?" she asked quietly. "I've already resigned. There's nothing between us anymore. I've truly always loved you." Hearing Emily say she loved me no longer stirred any emotion in me. I couldn't even distinguish my feelings for her at first, but later, I realized I didn't love her. It was just youthful resentment. And the child? It was just an accident from a drunken night. She began, but I interrupted her before she could continue. "Emily, I can't get over it. Every day that I'm with you, I imagine you two kissing. And besides, Emily, I don't love you anymore. Please, don't come back to bother me, okay?" Emily seemed shaken by my words, and I knew they had reached her, but I had to be firm. I couldn't leave her any hope. This way would be better for both of us. After I spoke, Emily didn't say anything. The room fell into silence as she lowered her head, lost in thought. I wasn't in a hurry. I simply waited quietly, hoping she would understand. After a while, Emily's muffled voice echoed through the room. "Oliver, is there really no chance at all?" My gaze drifted to the bustling street outside, the noise outside a sharp contrast to the stillness in the room. Memories of the past few years flashed in my mind. I smiled faintly. Yes, the night I proposed, my love for you began to fade. I felt her grip tighten on my hand, followed by something soft falling onto it. I knew she was crying again. It was rare. Before, she rarely showed so much emotion toward me. Now, almost every time she saw me, she cried. I felt her hand slowly weaken, and I knew Emily had given up. The medicine is on the table. Remember to take it, I said, turning and walking out of the room. As the door closed behind me, Emily's tearful voice reached my ears. I'm sorry. The hallway was bathed in sunlight, and I stood there, looking at the closed door. A complex emotion surged within me. Behind that door lay 3 years of youth, the love I had given with all my heart. But perhaps life would always have regrets, and I didn't need to stay trapped in the past. It was time to embrace the future that was only mine with all my strength. Chapter 14. After that, Emily never bothered me again. The focus of the expedition team gradually shifted overseas, and I found myself spending less and less time in the country. The next time I saw Emily was at my wedding. I was greeting guests at the entrance when someone brought over a pair of wristwatches. There was also a note with handwriting I knew all too well. It was Emily's. In 10 miles of spring breeze, I congratulate you on this auspicious day. May you have peace, joy, and fulfillment of your wishes. I looked up and caught a glimpse of a white figure leaving. It looked as though she were fleeing in haste. I smiled and put the note back in its place. Perhaps this was the best ending for Emily and me.